to set the scene before we get started, this is the third of our sort of leadership lunch and learn sessions. So some of you here may have already attended the previous two sessions that we've done on managing remote teams, and also on building resilience, that have been extremely successful. So if you've attended those already, then thank you very much. Hopefully you'll find today just as useful. I think as a topic in terms of hybrid working, just over the past, well, even the past week, I've seen articles being issued, seen articles in the press and news items, and some interesting statistics, which I think hopefully will add to the discussion today, and hopefully sort of stimulate that thought and that conversation about, you know, what's happening at the moment, some people that have perhaps already moved into this area, but for a lot of us thinking about how this is going to change over the rest of 2021. And just in terms of some of the things that I've been looking at recently, the BBC, I think just 2 weeks ago, had done a survey, and 43 of the 50 big UK employers had said that they would not be bringing employees back into the office full time. A survey done by the CBI, who were represented on the panel with today, had said that 76% of businesses expect that flexible working is going to become more common, and that 47% expect that most workforces will be adopting hybrid working by the end of 2021. I think other things that also are perhaps going to have an impact on the decisions, or will be outcomes of the decisions. ACAS had quoted just last week that the cost per employee of resolving conflict in the workplace, which may be to do with working hours, which may be to do with working patterns, with resignations, with changes in job roles, costs £1,000 per employee per year. And a lot of those things are going to perhaps be influenced by the decisions that we make in terms of our hybrid working. So looking forward to some useful information, conversation, questions, and just things really to get us all thinking. So I'm really, really pleased to be joined by a fantastic panel. Thank you so much for giving up your time today. What I'm going to do is just go to each of them so that they can introduce themselves and let you know who they are and where they are and what they're going to be sort of adding to today's conversation. So I'm going to start with Katie, if that's okay. I'll hand over to you.
Absolutely, thank you, Lucy. So good afternoon, everybody. Lovely to see you all. My name's Katie Allen. I am a leadership consultant and coach. I'm based in the Cambridgeshire area. And I work with organisations reviewing their people, practices and policies. My background is in HR and business management. And I work with organisations to review their working practices and policies with a view to making them a bit more innovative and engaging with engagement and inclusivity more in their organisations. I'm also a coach, so I work with groups and individuals to look at the way that they view themselves and their lives and create the changes that they want to make both in their personal lives and their career. So that's me.
Super, thank you, Katie. I'm just going to go across the screen as the boxes appear. So Lara, if I could come to you next, please.
Thanks, Lucy. I'm Laragh Jeanroy. I'm managing partner of RSM in East Anglia. RSM is a national accounting and tax advisory firm. And we have two offices that I look after in East Anglia, our Bury St Edmunds office and our Cambridge office. And we're going to be the first office of the firm to adopt our new ways of working. We're actually moving office and we're designing an office and space that embraces hybrid, agile, flexible working, so which is planned to be completed at the end of June. So we're right in the thick of it at the minute, so interesting times.
Absolutely, thank you, Lara. And across to Rob next.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, my name is Rob Alder. I head up the business development team at AAT, Association of Accounting Technicians, which is a professional and awarding body within accounting. So from my perspective, I manage 4 different teams, of which half of them are kind of hybrid teams or have been hybrid teams pre-pandemic. So I'll kind of bring those experiences to the fore today. And many of my teams, yeah, they're working with training providers like First Intuition, employers like RSM, And obviously, you know, our aim is to try and increase the numbers of students doing our qualifications in the UK and internationally.
Super, thank you, Rob. Barnaby, if I can come to you next.
Thank you, Lucy. So my name is Barnaby Clark. I'm Group Sales and Marketing Director for COEL. We're an office and laboratory design and build company based in Cambridge, and we work nationwide. We are currently working with a number of organisations who are either looking to adapt their workspace to bring people back, or looking to move and create a new workspace that really reflects new working methods, whatever they may be. So that's us, and I hope I can add some value in that respect.
Absolutely, some more sort of practical points there. Thanks, Barnaby. Will, come to you next.
Thanks, Lucy. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Will Farnell. I'm founder and director of Farnell Clarke. We're an accountancy firm, 4 offices across Norfolk and Suffolk, about 60 people in our team. Really looking forward to today's conversation. We moved to what we refer to as a results-orientated work environment, or a work when, where and how you want policy in February 2019. So pre-COVID. So hopefully there's some experiences that we can share in terms of what worked and what didn't work, and what has changed as a result of the last 12 months.
Excellent, thank you, Will. And last but by no means least, Richard, I can come to you.
Brilliant, thanks, Lucy. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Richard DeNetto. I'm the Associate Director for the CBI for the East of England. So the CBI is the largest business organisation in the UK. We campaign for business-friendly policy and provide a leadership voice to business, and in that position where we can codify best practice and experience across our membership base to produce reports like our hybrid working guide, which are really practical examples and steps of what businesses need to consider when thinking about that return to office. And I'll pop that guide in the chat through today's discussion.
Excellent, thank you very much. So our fantastic panel that we have, thank you very much. So what we're going to do is going to start with Katie this afternoon, and Katie's going to introduce to us what actually is hybrid working. Let's just put that into context. What do we mean by hybrid working? Also to sort of look at what isn't hybrid working, because I think it's quite, it's often a bit of overlap and confusion over what we actually mean by hybrid working itself, and then also to look at some of the regulations and things that surround hybrid working, and things that we might need to consider as we start to make these decisions in terms of perhaps changing the way that we work. So I will hand over to you, Katie.
Super, thank you. So yes, thank you for that introduction there, Lucy. So I thought it might be a great way to kick this off as actually talking about what is hybrid working, because it's this term that in the last at least 6 to 12 months everybody's really started using, like we all know what we're talking about, but actually really what is hybrid working? So pre-pandemic, I think most of us were probably used to working in a way that we were mostly all of us at least, co-located in an office building and working for our organisations. And then about 12 months ago, this thing happened, and all of us had to really quickly learn to, most of us, translate to a 100% remote working environment. And that's something that people have been managing with for quite a while now. And hybrid working is this space that occupies the middle of the two. It's the way in which we're going to blend and balance co-located working and remote working. And when you think about it, that's quite a huge chunk of variables that can go on in between those two spaces. So when we start thinking about what is and isn't hybrid working, I think the one thing we really need to start thinking about is hybrid working is not a one size fits all solution. It's going to be something that is going to be completely individual to your businesses and your organizations. So you as leaders and people within your organizations, you will understand what are the boundaries that you have in the ways that you work? What are the responsibilities that you have? What is it you're trying to deliver? How do you connect with your clients and your customers? But we also need to give some thought and consideration to your people as well, because in a similar way, they will also have their own boundaries that will have developed over the past 12 months. They're going to have their own thoughts and feelings and anxieties, and they're going to know what's going to feel reasonable to them as well. And interestingly enough, in a Personnel Today survey, pre-pandemic, when they surveyed people, 45% of respondents said that they would be happy to work 5 days a week in the office. If we fast forward to now, they've redone that survey, and the respondents came back and said only 5% of them would want to be working 5 days a week in the office. And when you think that's such a huge shift in mindset just in the space of 12 months, given everything that we've learned through having to move to this remote working focus. So there's one side. And then if we think about, okay, if that's how our people are feeling, how are we going to connect as businesses to what our people need in terms of what hybrid working might look like? And the real key here is you've got to ask them, you've got to talk to your people, and you've got to listen to what it is they're saying. And interestingly, the CMI also have done a survey, and apparently 50% of the managers that they spoke to haven't actually consulted with their people to talk about what the preferred working arrangements might be in the future of returning to work. And that's a huge gulf of information that you could be missing if you haven't started those conversations with your people. So I think the first thing to think about here is that it's not one size fits all. You're not going to go to the hybrid working website and download a checklist and kind of do all the actions and think, yep, that's us doing hybrid working. So you've got to know what you need and what works for you, but you've also got to talk to your people and figure out what they need and what works for them, and somehow try and bring those two things together, knowing that you're probably not going to please everybody, but at least come up with a way that's going to work best in your organisation for your circumstances. And when we think about the way that might be beneficial to us, so the things that hybrid working can bring, it can bring flexibility. So that's fantastic because you can reach an audience that perhaps you haven't reached before in terms of bringing new people into your business. It can help lifestyles of your employees to manage their childcare, their elder care, any of their personal working circumstances a bit better. People are going to be really, we were having a chat before this call started around commuting time. I think some people at the minute are really excited to have a commute to the office is going to be really exciting. But how long is that going to last? Apparently, Richard was saying that 80% of the Cambridge traffic is almost back to how it was pre-pandemic. So I'm pretty sure there's going to be some people that novelty is only going to last too soon. And they're going to be longing for the days where the productivity of not having to spend 2 hours in the car is going to be something that's really important. So for a lot of people, that time working at home where they can really concentrate and focus is going to be really helpful in keeping them productive. So there's that piece that you're going to want to think about. But then there's also the complete opposite, which is some people have really struggled with the distractions of being at home and being forced into this environment. So some people have been working on ironing boards or on their dining room table, or for some of your workforce, they may have been living and eating and sleeping in exactly the same room all of the time, and they're just longing to get back to an office environment where they can see people and they can collaborate and they can move out of that space. So we have to start thinking about the mental health side of things and people with their mental health worries, and also the work-life balance piece. So making sure that we are tapping into what people need for well-being. So there's all of that to consider. And these are some of the topics that we're going to get into throughout this session. But it's not just clients as well that I would urge you to think about. I would also urge you to reach out and speak to your employees. I urge you to reach out and speak to your clients and customers too. Who are the people that you provide your products and services to? What are they doing when it comes to hybrid working arrangements, if they're doing anything at all? How do you connect with that? How do you make sure what you're doing is still going to service their needs? So there's on the Venn diagram of things to think about. They all come together with you in the middle, making sure that you're really thinking about how do you tap into the areas that you need to tap into. And it really is an opportunity to kind of press that reset button and think about, if we were going to do things differently, what would we do? What would we change? And how would we harness this going forward? So they're all the kind of things that you can think about what hybrid working is. Something that hybrid working isn't, it's not, and this is getting into the employment law side of things, it's not a replacement for flexible working requests. So that is one thing I would like to flag, because it seems to be something that's coming up in conversation with some of my clients that they hadn't really thought about. So flexible working requests are a legal right for an employee to be able to ask to vary their working conditions. So it could well be changing their hours or changing their work pattern somehow. that still remains, and employers are able to do this once every 12 months, unless it's related to a specific disability, in which case they can ask more frequently. So do keep that in your mind, that if your employees are putting in flexible working requests, you absolutely will need to give the same level of consideration to those that you would have done with or without any of your hybrid working arrangements. So you can't just point to your flexible working policy and say, this is what we do now and this is what we're going to stick to. You've really got to remember that those requests need to be taken seriously and given the consideration they need. And that then brings me on to other parts of varying terms and conditions that you might be thinking of. So it's not just flexible working requests, it's in any of the changes that you might make in terms of your hybrid working policy. You really need to think about the knock-on effect of those to your employment contracts. And interestingly, a YouGov survey said that 26% of organisations might be looking to either close, downsize or consolidate the office space. And if you're having those conversations, you need to think about what that might mean to your employment contracts. Because if you're going to vary somebody's place of work, that's a consultation that will need to take place in order to successfully achieve that. So there's just those pieces that you need to be really mindful of when you're making your decisions. What might some of the potential impact to that be? And I think it was Will, I think, who mentioned around having the work from anywhere policy, perhaps in his organisation. And I think this is an interesting one. Now, I'm not a tax expert, but I'm hoping there's plenty of people in the room here that will be able to answer on this one. But you might need to think about some of the tax implications if you do go really available and accessible and say we're going to have a work from anywhere policy. If I'm your employer and say, excellent, I've got a holiday home in Spain, see you later. What might that mean to you and your tax implications there, or your visa implications, given that they might be going to the European Union? So all of those things you might want to think about when you're having these conversations. It's not saying that you can't do them, it's just saying be mindful of them. And finally, then that brings me on to the rest of your policies and procedures. Whatever you choose to do make sure you go back and review any impact that might have on your policies and procedures. So from simple things in terms of how does someone call in sick? It might vary now from when everybody was co-located to if you've got a different arrangement where more people are at home. What's the process? Make sure your people understand what's expected of them. To some maybe more of the more serious things, which again we're going to come in and talk about through the rest of the session. So making sure you don't create in and out groups when people are working in the office and they're visible and present versus people who are going to be at home and missing out on those conversations and might start to feel resentful. Make sure you're not discriminating in any way when you're putting those kind of working practices together. And also think about your information security as well. Make sure that your policies and procedures are set up to support whichever way of working that you want to put together. So you need to start thinking all of that through. And I think that's it from the kind of what is, what isn't, and things that we might want to talk about through the rest of the session. So hopefully that's given you some food for thought, and let's have some questions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Katie. That's a great sort of introduction. Again, just sort of setting that scene as to what do we mean and what don't we mean in terms of the hybrid working and some real practical things that we need to consider. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Dave at this point. I'm just going to start the questions. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you very much, Lucy, and thank you very much, Katie. One of the things that I wanted to kind of direct towards Will, who's been doing this for I think in this area for a while. And Will, I know you run a practice, so this is something that I think is very kind of pertinent to a lot of our audience. I've heard quite a lot of people in accountancy firms and also in financial services saying that kind of hybrid working and people not being based in the office was kind of potentially a security risk in terms of data security. So what kind of considerations, what kind of things do we need to ensure kind of data integrity and ensure that there aren't any data issues?
Good question, Dave. So I think the first point with this is that it's a mindset shift in terms of the fundamental business model. So there's got to be infrastructure, there's got to be communication infrastructure before you even kind of start to think about the real detail of how do we make sure that data is secure. It's how do you fundamentally make it work. And interestingly for us is we made this decision through consultation with the team that outcome was far more important than input. So the outputs that we delivered outweighed the inputs, and certainly from our clients' perspective, clients didn't care about the input, they only care about the output. So we wanted to help our team focus on delivering great outcomes and great outputs for clients, and that's the measure. So when we talk about operating a results-orientated work environment, it's you can work when, where, and how you want, as long as is that the client remains delighted, that response times are as good as they are when you're in the office, that when you need to be in the office, you come into the office. So there's a real mindset shift in terms of the way that works. And what was interesting is that the majority of our team still came to the office. So they had the opportunity to work when, where, and how they wanted, but we'd created a culture and an environment that meant people came to the office for the majority of the time. But what it meant is if somebody had a hair appointment, a doctor's appointment, a dentist appointment, they didn't need to take a day off for it, because they'd do that and they'd come in the office at 11 o'clock and do some work. But we went as far as also not, be careful how I say this, not capping annual leave. So we went to the point where we said, we're going to track your annual leave, but we're not putting a cap on it. So actually, if clients remain delighted and all the work gets done, if you want to take 42 days holiday a year, you can do, as long as business delivery continues. So that's kind of some of the mindset stuff. In terms of the specifics, this is where the infrastructure's got to come in, and we've been very technology focused for 12 of the 14 years that I've been running the firm, and we have cloud infrastructure in place. We have two-factor authentication on everything that we do. We don't operate paper, so we're not shifting paper files around between locations. So that infrastructure is there to support the business model that we've adopted.
Okay, and Katie, I can see you kind of nodding away there at various different points. One of the things that I'd kind of just like to try and get under the skin of a little bit there, Will, is you talked a little bit about how it was a cultural change, and how do you go about kind of shifting that culture? Because I know from what I worked in practice, and I know some of our audience did, that practice was always about getting 37.5 hours in your timesheet every single week, come what may. And you seem to be saying, well, I don't care really about your timesheet. I care about, are you delivering the jobs on time for people? So how does that culture, how do you shift the culture?
So timesheets for a room full of potentially some accountants is a topic for another day. We don't record time. So firstly, the point is we're focused on outputs and not inputs, so we don't measure the inputs in that way. But I think it is culture's a big thing, and when we think about culture and what makes up culture, we get into values, beliefs, personalities, and a whole bunch of things that don't change overnight. It's got to be a clearly defined decision that the leadership of a business takes, and you start to think about the time frame that's going to happen, the recruitment that you undertake, to make a long-term decision. And it starts with vision, it starts with value proposition, and so many businesses still don't put enough attention on what it is they're ultimately trying to do. What's the big thing that they want to change in the world that drives them to get out of bed in the morning? And you've got to have that big vision to make that cultural shift, and recognize the people that you're wanting to work with and how you're going to support them.
Because that's really interesting. I think someone's asked in the chat about your holiday policy, and to be honest, it's something that I've heard of before, but I've always struggled to kind of think how it actually works. And are there any situations where it almost feels internally like some people are really taking advantage of that, and other people are kind of like getting the short end of the stick a little bit?
No, I think again it comes down to the structure that you have in place and how you operate it, and there's a lot of emphasis placed on our managers and our management team to make sure that it's done fairly and that people are delivering what they have to deliver to be able to reap those benefits. Because if the work's getting done, then people can't take the extra leave. And it's for the managers to and that's why I say it's uncapped and not untracked, because people still have to say, can I take this leave? Because it would be no good if 5 people in one team all said, hey, I'm all having next week off, because then you're not delivering the outcome, you're not delivering the output for the client. So again, mindset is a huge part of this working successfully, and there's got to be give and take. And the way that we did it initially is we almost created a staff charter that said, you can choose to sign up to this if you want to. You don't have to do it. If you want to stay 37.5 hours a week with your 25 days holiday, that's fine. If you want to sign up to the staff charter, this is what we're going to offer and this is what we expect in return. So it was a conscious decision that people made to say, yes, I'm happy to kind of get into that environment and work in that way.
Did you have any staff that wanted to take the option of not going in that direction and staying in the way that they'd always worked to that point?
Whilst nobody said I don't want to do it, there were lots of people that did do it because it's comfort. So they, regardless of the fact they could choose when they like to work, if they always came in at 7:30 and left at 4, they still came in at 7:30 and left at 4, or whatever the timings were. Or if they were the ones that turned up at 10 and left at 6:30, they would do the same. So we give people choice, and in the majority of cases, people will do what they've always done, but they know that they have that flexibility. If on one day they can't do it or don't want to do it, they don't have to, and it's worked pretty well.
Excellent. And Lara, from your point of view, you're coming to this kind of post-COVID or coming out of COVID and looking at the way that you're working. Where are you on that journey at the moment? I guess, are you, because Will's obviously in a position whereby, fortunately for him, he was there prior to COVID. I guess you're probably having those conversations about data security and people's working patterns. So how's that journey going for you at the moment, and where are you on that kind of timeline?
Yeah, well, I think unlike Will, we were probably quite traditional in the way that we operated our office. So everyone had a fixed desk that they came to, and everyone had their own desk, and we had meeting rooms that people would have meetings in, and it was a very structured, traditional way of working. And then obviously the pandemic hit and everyone had to work from home. So there were some challenges around that, but we did react quite quickly. So everyone had laptop screens, we made sure everyone had the IT equipment, everything was in the cloud, we implemented Teams. And as I said, now that we're coming back into the office during the pandemic, we did a full review of our ways of working, and we appointed Savills to do that for us nationally, because we've got 36 offices across the UK. And our Bury St Edmunds office, our lease was coming up for renewal at the end of, this April. So we took the view before Christmas that we'd use the opportunity, because we were looking at how people had embraced many aspects of remote working and also what they missed about being in the office. So we did various surveys of staff. We used data that we had in the office because we have key card entry, so we could track back over the past year before pandemic hit, how many people were using the office, how regularly, and we sort of realised that, at its peak, it was probably 60% capacity, so we probably didn't need as many fixed desks. So, as a result of all that information, we then decided in Bury that we'd move to a space that we could tailor to what we think the new ways of working are going to be. And I say what we think, because I think, as Katie said, it's very much a personal choice. We surveyed lots of staff, some really happy working remotely, some not. It does depend on your environment and whether or not you've got children or other people at home. But we found, as part of that survey, 67% of staff said they'd like to come into the office at least 3 days a week. So that's how we structured it. But in terms of designing the office, and again, picking up, I think, on some words that Katie used, it's all about dynamic, flexible working, using technology and promoting well-being and mental health. So instead of the traditional sort of fixed desks and meeting rooms, the new office has fixed desks for those that want to book a desk and work with double screens. There's collaborative areas where teams can work. There's a mix of spaces where you could have some people sitting in sort of booths, I'd say, but with screens so someone else can join the meeting through Teams and be on video conferencing. More social space than we had because we haven't got as many fixed desks, because we realised, you know, we only had 60% of people using those fixed desks. So some more social breakout spaces, a nice kitchen area. So just a real mix, because we realised actually a lot of people have got very comfortable working from home, and you've got to find an environment or present an environment that makes them want to come back into the office. I think Will's point was, I think there will some people that will want to come back in and they'll be in 5 days a week and they'll go back to their old routine, because that's people. There will other people that will pick and choose what they want to do. And I guess what we've said is it's as you need to be in as the business needs you, but also as you need. So if an individual wants to be in every day, that's fine. They might not need to be in every day, but that's their personal choice. And likewise, if people want to work fully remotely, they are going to have to be in when they need to be. So there'll be a Teams day per week for each team, just to make sure at least people are coming in regularly so we don't lose some of that team working, but a lot of flexibility around it. And as I said, the space has been designed to allow for those different types of use. Whereas as before, as I said, it was you came and you sat at your desk, or you had to book a meeting room if you wanted to talk to anyone. Whereas I said, we've got now all these sort of different areas, and we'll see. I mean, we move into that new office on the 1st of July. Hopefully by that point, lockdown will be lifted, although fingers crossed. But also we've been mindful that there may still be restrictions in the workplace. So we've made sure it's more distanced. We've got a track and trace and a booking app to make sure. So we sort of built into our planning the fact that there may still need to be some restrictions. So it's exciting, because I think we're adopting a new way of working in a purpose-built office for that. Had we been staying in our current office, it would have been harder, I think, to adopt hybrid working, flexible working, however you are. It's hybrid working. Yes, Katie, I've learned that now. Because it would be in the same space. So I think trying to change people's behaviours when you're used to having your own desk and you sat there for 10 years, it'd be quite difficult to say to someone, you don't need to come to that desk every day if that's what they felt comfortable doing. So I think because of the environment we're creating, I'm hoping that we'll get and we'll learn a lot, I think. And we're just surveying staff now as we're going back into the offices, and we'll do surveys when we're 3 months in, because I think there will be some things that work very well. There are things that we think might work that might not work. But the idea of the furniture and some of the things that we've put in is that it's flexible, so we can change it if we find something doesn't work. It's not, as I said, so traditional and set out as it was in the past, that we won't have the ability to adapt. So I think it's very much talking to clients and staff as we go through that journey to find out what they think's working for them, and things that they like and things that they don't find benefit them at all. So it's the start of a journey.
Thanks for that. I guess from, as you said, changing premises in this period is really going to help. And something I know that Will may not know this, but I have been to a meeting at your offices, Will, with one of your colleagues quite a number of years ago, when we were looking at running courses for the first time in Norfolk. And the thing that really struck me when I walked through the door is it didn't feel like a normal office. It was kind of laid out in a completely different way. It almost gave me the impression of being like a tech startup rather than a firm of accountants. And so, I guess kind of with that in mind, I'm kind of going to aim my next question in Barnaby's general direction as being our expert in this field. Most of us have been used to kind of 18 months ago going to work in a concrete rectangle of some form, in a very traditional layout. What should we be looking at to make the best of those spaces to kind of facilitate kind of hybrid working?
I think Lara's really set it off in the right tone, and something we're looking to do at the moment is really engage with employees. So we're looking to start a large survey with a business psychologist just to get a large data set on, and it's all about looking at it's what people want, what do you need and what do you want to get back into the office, what's going to bring you out of home and what's going to benefit you, and that's not just physically and the practicalities of how you're going to sit and work, it's emotionally as well. So I think this is all wrapped up in as much as it is about Will's team and about the management of this, that if it might be that people want to come in and just collaborate, they just want to meet people, so managers have to learn to deal with the fact that whenever they see their team are just having a coffee and a chat, and their work, the work is being done at home. So it's the management style and the acceptance that people will work in different ways is going to be key. Emotionally, I think people want to feel part of a team, and I think that might be just the fact that people drop in. It's team events. It's Lara mentioned about people with small children. They're probably going to be in the office 5 days a week and a quiet desk in the corner. And it's about atmosphere. Gareth mentioned on the chat about commute as well. So I think some people might enjoy going to the office purely to get that commute in, to have that 20 minutes, 30 minutes of clear headspace. So it's really about discovering what people want. And, invariably it's going to be less traditional work settings across the board, but it's what you replace those with. What's this sort of away from desk items? So, having those booths for quiet working. I think the comment about team calls, team calls are going to be a large part of work moving forward, and how do you facilitate those? It might be there's a large number of team calls, so people don't want to tie up meeting rooms, so it's those smaller spaces. I think the number of companies we've spoken to recently who are looking to do this, it's really focusing around a hub, having everyone coming in. The office is a hub where you come to, and that hub tends to form itself around a breakout space. So it's really, the change as you walk in, offices, as we move forward, should have those traditional work settings for those who need it, but everything else, everywhere is a work setting. Everywhere is a place you can sit down and open a laptop. Everywhere you can, having a coffee with someone at a cafe table is a workplace. And as soon as, it's that management style, learning to deal with that.
Absolutely. Thanks, Barnaby.
No problem.
So I think quite a few of the comments that have been made so far sort of lead me to my next question, which I'm going to direct at Richard, if that's okay, because I was listening to a recent webinar from CBI, and produced a guide, and it also links in with a question that's come in from Ian in the chat box, that we've got many different things that we need to balance here and consider. In terms of our employees as individuals and the different needs, and Ian's commenting about perhaps more junior staff versus senior staff having a very different perspective on what they need, because some of them may well be working from a bedroom and absolutely want to get back into the office, and so different needs of our individuals, our employees, versus what the business needs and what the business itself needs to achieve. But also I was interested to see that the CBI sort of report had also touched on thinking about the local economy as well, and the impact of the decisions that some of the big businesses are going to make around hybrid working, and what impact that will have on other businesses and other sectors in and around that office space. So it'd be really interesting just to hear about sort of your opinion on that, Richard, and thinking about getting that balance right.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Lucy. Yeah, and I think a lot of it the panelists have touched on, but I think to get this right, flexibility is required, and it's required on both sides of the equation. And just through this call, and I think probably every conversation everyone on this call has had internally about flexible working, we've come to realise that there are more questions than there are answers. I think to make hybrid work, anyone who says that they have all the answers probably just hasn't asked the right questions. You might think that hybrid working can reduce your office space requirements, but what if all colleagues want to work in the office Tuesday through Thursday and have Monday and Friday off? What does that mean for my space requirements? Not to mention, of course, the fit out costs and adding more meeting pods and that collaborative space. Barnaby is absolutely right. But I think that surety that business needs, that actually I'm going to use that for its useful life of the asset. Is it something that that I know that I can invest in right now? And what approach do we have to flexible working? We've talked about those two options really. That kind of semi-formal presenteeism of 2 days in an office, it has complications. What if one week I need to be in the office 5 days a week, the next I don't need to be in the office at all? I bank my working in the office days and take them forward. Firms are deciding to go more down that task-based approach, so that actually I need to be in the office for certain tasks and I can work from home from certain tasks, which yes might mean that when I see my team are chatting rather than sitting underneath a laptop. Well, quite frankly, they can do that at home, so we all kind of expect that they are. I think perhaps one of the learnings that people have had is that, to your point, managers and leaders they probably have the best work at home set up. They probably have an office space that they can use and have gone through that training and learning through osmosis by colleagues, so can be very self-sufficient in their own little four walls. But I think they'll need to be more present than they feel perhaps they want to be. They'll need to be there to support teams development, and especially people that are new to the company and new to the workplace. I think that's really important. I'm sure everyone on this call learn from senior colleagues, just listening to what they were doing, trying to make it fit into how their style works and developed over time. That workplace has been a great leveler. One of my members was talking to me that they had to open their office up through the pandemic because one of the team in their legal team, was in their 30s, lives at home with their parents and actually doesn't have their own room, so doesn't have a room that they can go to that is just theirs that they can work. So I think, if you're in a bedsit or in a 5-bedroom detached house, my desk at work is the same as anybody else's. So I think for many from deprived backgrounds, that working from home hasn't been the panacea. And I think hybrid working and work from home has allowed firms to recruit from further afield. I've certainly seen that of people in Northampton taking on roles in rural Suffolk, and I wouldn't have done that before the pandemic and working from home, but if I need to be in the office 1 day a week, I can manage that. But I think we need to make sure that while that's great and we can unlock some of the talent issues we have in this region, we should be alive to the issue to make sure we can make sure our workplaces are inclusive to all. For businesses with manufacturing and operations, contingent workforce that have to be in a fixed place, they're trying to grapple with that. Well, what's fairness in terms of flexibility? And it's not necessarily to say, me working on a production line, I'll get the exact same work from home requirements as the person working on in the accounts team, but actually can we maximise our individual flexibility as part of the role? And through the pandemic, we've seen that shift patterns have changed, and they may better suit people's living requirements and home needs. So it's just like being attuned to that fact. And you mentioned the impact on the economy. Think of all the coffee vans that used to come to your workplace. Where have they gone? That we've all heard about that impact of lunchtime economy, the Pret economy, especially within our bigger cities across the UK. And some of that is starting to return. As I said, I think footfall in Cambridge is back to 80% of pre-pandemic levels. But what happened? How do we make up that 20%? And I think the retail sector has already had to be pretty innovative. The pandemic has sped up that need to change and adapt. We've seen just in the last couple of weeks, Pret striking partnerships with Tesco's, and the retail sector are really speeding up that transformation to mixed use. So evolving that experience of going to the shops to be more of an experience and a destination than it once was.
Excellent, thank you, Richard. And you're touching on the those different employees and the needs there. And there's a comment that came in from Gavin that's created some chat in the chat box, which I really like, about these micro moments and making sure that we sort of preserve those. And that sort of 30-second conversation that where you're overhearing something and you can add to that and contribute to that. I'm actually going to jump ahead in the questions, if that's all right, and bring Robin at that point, because wanted to talk to Rob, which is linked to this issue of the micro moments and the teams, in terms of making sure that all of the members of the team still feel there's that cohesion, and we think about the whole sort of EDI aspect of that as well. Rob, can I come to you for sort of your comments on that, please?
Yeah, sure. I mean, on the team cohesion, I mean, just looking at my experience of a couple of my teams that were kind of remote workers before the pandemic, they definitely felt kind of in that kind of out category. If you look at the kind of in-out kind of workers, they felt slightly removed from the organisation, and it was very difficult to integrate them in the organisation in terms of building personal relationships, and also kind of being kind of rather kind of outside, out of mind. What was quite interesting in the last year or so, with everyone working from home and no actual kind of office, is that they felt very much more part of things. They were in the same boat as everyone else working from home. And the interesting thing was that we do an annual kind of best company survey around employee engagement, and my teams kind of increased dramatically during the time. So the survey we did pre-pandemic, and then the survey that we carried out during the pandemic, the teams that were previously not very engaged during the pandemic were suddenly engaged because they felt the same as everyone else. So the reason for mentioning that is I think going into a hybrid environment, what does that mean in terms of the actual team cohesion? I think individual teams, the cohesion, I don't see any real challenges, because I think, as already been mentioned earlier, a lot of teams are planning on being in the office a set day a week, so they can all get together and do the social chit chat and get together and maybe go for lunch and go for drinks after. But I do think my experience is that the way the team is formed and the way the team is managed, so that there's a role there for the manager and the leader to make sure that cohesion is maintained, particularly with that kind of balance being in the office and not in the office. I suppose my concern is more the wider team. So a team can say, right, we're going to be in on a Tuesday, whatever, but if then another team, different part of the organisation, is on a Thursday, then those teams will have very little connectivity on that, and that kind of the bit that I think we're all missing is that kind of seeing people in the kitchen and having a chat and finding out what they're doing. So there is a risk, I think, of in some of these models of increasing that kind of silo mentality. Well, I think the individual teams would be all right, but then the wider teams may not be able to kind of work in the same way. So I think that's a challenge. And I suppose another point just to kind of raise, and we touched upon this a little bit around technology, and I think we've all been amazed and grateful, and we're all now used to having these kind of meetings, and they all work brilliantly. But my concern with some people going back into the office, some people being at home, how that all works in the same way, because my experience of my teams is that if you're dialing into a call and say it's not on Zoom, you've got 3 or 4 people in a meeting room, you've got 2 people at home. Those 2 people at home don't often feel as close and as involved and as engaged in the meeting as those people in the office. And a lot of it's quite difficult sometimes to read the body language. Some of the kind of chat before the meeting and after the meeting that takes place, you kind of miss out on. So from changing the way we're working at the moment, which is kind of everyone in the same field, to then suddenly having people in and out of the office, I think it will create some challenges that I think only by experience and also only by us as managers that we can look to overcome them. The final point, Lucy, was about EDI, and I think many organisations now are making great strides on that. Everyone is embracing it, and if you think the response to Black Lives Matter, which obviously took place in the last year, I think most organisations have embraced that and the opportunities that presents. But I think, again, with this in-out culture, I think it is also thinking around what the impact might be on certain groups, and to ensure that people are treated differently based on their background and the situation. I mean, there's 2 ways of looking at it. I mean, there's a risk that potentially, for example, for example, women are still seen as the primary carers, so they may be at home more than others. And if the culture of the organisation is more suited to kind of visibility in the office, they potentially could be overlooked. So there's a risk there. But I think organisations just need to apply some of the great things that are happening around EDI to make sure this kind of in-out kind of culture that will evolve in a hybrid model is embedded into the new way of working.
Absolutely, yeah, couldn't agree more, Robin. That culture issue, again, another comment in the chat box resonates with something that I heard yesterday. We're looking at new premises in Sheffield at the moment, and the letting agent, we were talking about this with him, and he talked about this weekend sort of culture, how they can't work from home on a Monday and a Friday, because it basically means that, are they just getting a long weekend? And I noticed a comment there from Gavin talking about the weekends where Gavin's based, a Friday, Saturday. And so there was this whole perception of, well, you're just working at home that day, so you can get a nice long weekend. So, I suppose from that cultural perspective, if I can come to Katie, first of all, what kind of impact are we going to see on culture? Are there certain elements of things that we want to retain? Are there certain areas where we see massive change?
And absolutely there is going to be, but just on that point actually around a weekend culture, I think a lot of that comes back to what Will was talking about originally around creating a culture of autonomy within your organisation where people are responsible for delivering against what is required of them. And actually, if people then are going to work at home on a Monday and a Friday and perhaps do a bit less, does it matter if they're actually achieving everything they need and your clients and your customers and services provided? Is that a challenge and a battle that you want to take on, or is that something that you're willing to kind of go in and trust what they're doing throughout the week is everything they need to deliver? So there is that piece there, because autonomy for a lot of people is a real driver, to have the control over your own workload. I might want to work harder through the week so that I can have maybe a few hours less on a Friday. So there is that piece, to think about how are people being as productive under their own steam with their own autonomy of what they're trying to do. But also, so coming on to kind of the culture piece, how to decide what to retain and what to change. One of my favourite things that I've seen recently is from HBO, the TV production company, and they have a killer stupid rule. And it's one of my favourite things where everybody's invited to talk about things that they think impede productivity in their days, and there's a conversation, and if it seemed to be a stupid rule, they just don't do it anymore. And it really resonated with me in terms of what lessons have we learned through this pandemic experience. What can we take away and think, okay, when this all kicked off, what are the things that we are now doing without? We've become more innovative, we've become more agile. Do we want to just go back to working in an office and picking those things back up? Or actually, can we just say see you later to those things because they're not delivering any value, or we're going to do things differently going forward? And in trying to figure out what those things might be, I know a lot of people are quite familiar with general root cause analysis, where you would talk through like people, you would talk through process, and you talk through equipment. But for me, I kind of prefer to look at things in terms of how are we engaging with our people. So I like to think about access. How are we bringing people into our organisation? And advancement. So how are people moving through our organisation? How are their careers developing? And authenticity, which is how are people arriving to us? We're talking about trust and autonomy. Who am I inviting into my organisation, and are they being their true selves, and am I allowing them to be that? And I think Richard talked a lot already around the access piece and the things that we can learn through our recruitment and bringing people into our companies. But I'm sure we've probably learned a lot around the onboarding process and things that must be a lot quicker in terms of getting equipment to people and kind of getting information to people very simply. But there's probably stuff actually with being together in a co-located space that you're going to want to embrace with bringing new starters on board, because there's going to be those face-to-face introductions that we've probably been missing. So there'll be some blended pieces of work you might want to do around that as an example. And then in terms of advancement, for those of you that have got more than one office and potentially international offices, this gives a real opportunity for global mobility, for people to really work and collaborate with people in other countries and be seen, you know, by other people within your organisation, or to create project teams that may have only been created in spaces where people are working physically together. But now, you know, the world's your oyster. You can work collaboratively with the people who have got the best skills to deliver within your teams for what you need the end result to be. So, you know, you can throw the net wide and be a bit more inclusive for everybody, and everybody gets a shot at maybe some of the projects they wouldn't have had an opportunity to before. So have a think around kind of the advancement and how are you looking at those things and letting people shine in roles they may not have been able to have access to before. And then finally, on the authenticity piece, I think we've been very fortunate, or not, depending on your circumstances, that most of our colleagues have now been inside our homes in one way or another. They've met our families, our kids, our pets. Like we all know more about each other from these last 12 months than we would have probably ever learned being in an office. So how do you want to protect some of that interaction? I think, you know, I've done enough quizzes and yoga classes and HIIT workout. You know, my colleagues will have seen me in ways that I would not have wanted them to, but I've embraced that now, and it's kind of like, actually I want them to see me as a human being still. I want to retain that. So whilst I probably don't want to go to the office in my pajamas, and that might not be something we'd be advocating, we do want to retain some of that, keeping your personality and coming to work more as you are rather than the person you were maybe presenting yourself to be. So there's probably some pieces in that around really how are you going to embrace and share some of that to keep that culture alive and keep those relationships built. So I think those would be the ways that I would go through thinking through how do we want to protect or change things.
Yeah, some really, really useful advice there. Thank you, Katie. I'm going to refer back to the CBI report at this point, if I can. I'm going to come to you, Richard. I think follows on quite nicely from what Katie was just talking about. And in that report, it focused on 4 sort of considerations. And one of those considerations was health and well-being. And just be, you know, sort of interested to hear from you, Richard, in terms of considerations, tips, things that we need to be thinking about again in terms of this new way of working in relation to the health and well-being side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Thanks, Lucy. So yeah, I think yeah, one of the good things about the pandemic is, you know, mental health and staff well-being has never been higher on a chief exec's agenda. You know, they're thinking about it as much as they're thinking about the you know, COVID business support packages and how they you know, get back the EBITDA lost. And many firms are doing, you know, we're doing good things before pandemic, but with the unique challenges of the pandemic, and I think the, you know, the personal impacts that and loss that, you know, people have experienced, and the absence of that, you know, normal office social life. Businesses have really been doubling down. So the report, as you alluded to, really kind of, I suppose, it codified and brought together some good examples of best practice that, you know, firms of all sizes up and down the country have been adopting, and kind of in kind of 2 buckets really. So that, you know, creating additional ways that employees can discuss mental health when working remotely. And I think some of it is about we set up what we set up during the pandemic, and some of it might have been rough and ready and good for the moment. And now it's about let's really embed it and yeah, make it as sophisticated and as it needs to be long lasting. So yeah, setting up virtual roundtables with mental health first aiders, instant messaging, anonymous hotlines. For those that don't have it, you know, getting that EAP system in place really gives, you know, and making sure it's visible and known, and the number is well known. It's all right to have it. Actually, if your workforce don't know about it, or how useful is it? Use workplace networks, and I think they've really come to the fore. If you think about, you know, Black Lives Matter movement, and, you know, your race networks, really kind of leading that agenda and understanding the impact on the whole of the organisation, but affects, you know, particularly on the ethnically diverse population, and then you know, more latterly, you know, women's networks have been coming to the fore as well, and really kind of leading and codifying that employee voice, and encouraging managers. And we've done this in the CBI, encouraging managers to you know, sit down virtually or physically and establish a mental health action plan with the teams. It can be really, really useful, and, you know, really about, you know, practices that support staff's mental health and physical well-being wherever they work. So you know, that kind of Zoom good practice, which I've let myself down today because I haven't built in some buffers to certain calls, but that, you know, limiting the calls to not half an hour but 25 minutes, not an hour but 50 minutes, to give employees breaks, you know, and encouraging people to take walks during the day. You know, managers considering how, you know, employee well-being when organising meetings, including you know, setting up precedent and probably leading from the front that actually you can join whilst walking. You know, and I think that's really useful when I'm listening to our all staff. So that's when I'll pop out, go for a walk. Well, if it's good enough for the CBI chief economist, it's good enough for me. And you know, I think leading by example kind of sets that expectation and sets that understanding of what the norm is. And kind of that, I suppose, that real honest conversations that we've got quite good at as managers now of actually, how are you? And pausing and waiting and not just going over it, but actually, yeah, I was talking, there's a mental health professional that I really rate, and it's like, how are you? And kind of rate yourself out of 1 to 10. Now, it might be that I'm always a 6 and that's fine. But actually, if one day I say I'm a 3, then we know we have a, you know, we've got the problem, we can dig into it. But, you know, really, I suppose being interested in that how are you conversation, and just feeling comfortable to have those conversations about mental health, and often the great ways of doing that is by being open about your own mental health. You know, it is a continuum. People do flux up and down from, you know, from stress to strain, and being honest and open about it will help your team feel that they can bring their whole self to work wherever that might be.
Yeah, I fully, absolutely agree with that. Just this morning, I'm lucky enough to live relatively closely to a few of my team, and at 8 o'clock this morning, I was on a 3-kilometre walk with a member of my team before we started work, just to have a chat, like you say, leading by example, sharing those stories, you know, finding out how are you away from the workplace, and, you know, sharing those stories. I'll just give a brief nod to the FI podcast, which this week has some very personal stories shared by some senior members of the FI team across the country in it, which is certainly worth a listen on that note. And yeah, really important part of that report. Thank you, Richard. Just to get us up to where we'd open things up to everybody else, going to have Q&A starting in just a few minutes if you've got things that you would like to ask the panel. But in that report, we also sort of touched on recruitment and development, and thinking about, in a more hybrid working environment, how do we perhaps need to change our approach to talent retention, onboarding and staff management. So Will, if I could come to you in terms of that sort of recruitment and retention piece.
Yeah, interestingly, I was on a webinar or a panel conversation with some firms in Singapore this morning, and we ran a poll, which was what's the biggest challenge you're facing as an accountant right now, and the accountants on this call might not be surprised to hear that it was recruitment and retention. There was an Australian representative who said the same thing. So it's a global problem. Access to top talent is and will continue to be a real challenge. And certainly for us, part of the reason that we made the move to build the culture that we have, the office environment that we have, the flexible working approach that we have, was purely about how do we compete against larger mid-tier firms. For a long time, we were an accounting firm that was too big to be small and too small to be big. And it's a really uncomfortable place to be, to sit in the middle, because people say, I want to work with a big firm, or I want to work with a small firm. Nobody wants to work with the firm in the middle. So we had to do lots of things to kind of make our offer compelling. And I think for me, that's the fundamental piece that people often miss, that we spend thousands and thousands of pounds marketing to attract the right clients. Yet we don't view recruitment as a marketing exercise, and we have to sell who we are, what we do, and why people should choose us rather than somebody else. So seeing recruitment as a marketing function and a marketing activity means you've got to have something compelling to say. And if you think about it, again, think about it as the output in terms of, we want to recruit really good people and we need to market to them. that makes you think about the things that make you unique and make your offer compelling and different and more appealing than anybody else. So it's where culture kind of underpins so much of what we do. And as we see a shift towards millennial, Gen Z generation, particularly millennials now holding senior management positions, the oldest millennials are 40, they think differently, and value proposition becomes so much more important. So we have to be able to communicate it effectively.
Thank you, Will. And finally, if I can come to Rob, in terms of motivating your team, monitoring, and thinking about different targets. If I can come to you on that, is that okay?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, it's quite straightforward for me actually, because I manage sales teams. So you just set them a target and then you just monitor it each month. It might be different in other areas, but I've noticed, you know, kind of pre-pandemic, during pandemic, and kind of what we're looking at now, that doesn't really change. I think the important thing there is around the people managing the teams, so they are engaging regularly with their team members. They're clear what their targets are. They're working with them to overcome any issues or any barriers, whatever they are, you know, not necessarily to do with the sales process, but to do with, you know, any challenges in their own life. I mean, that to me is just it's just good management. And I think I think again in the last year, I think we've all found that we can be very flexible with our management approach and style, and I think generally that's worked very well. I found that with my teams, you know, they're flexible as well, and levels of engagement have improved. So I don't have any concerns in that area. I don't think it should necessarily change. You know, the kind of, you know, the secrets of good management is just, you know, being clear what the objectives are and monitoring progress, you know, with your employee. And
as sort of senior leaders, I guess, in a changing environment, are there other skills that we need? Are there new ways of working that we need sort of training in? Are there sort of skills gaps at a senior level now that we haven't seen before? Happy to open that up to the whole panel, so feel free to answer.
I suppose one of the just on the senior leadership thing. I mean, obviously some of the things we talked about today. I think that there's a risk of younger workers being in the office and not being able to learn from managers and senior leaders who may be in the office less. So I think that is a potential challenge and problem we have to look at, and how we plug that gap. Obviously, what you don't want is, you know, kind of managers all at home and younger workers in the office. I mean, that's not going to be a very, you know, healthy recipe, I think, for development and managing things. So I think within a hybrid working environment, that type of engagement and development is something that will you know, needs to be looked at. How we do that successfully, you know, in the office and at home. So I think for me, I think it's understanding the differences in managing and leading with people in the office and not in the office, and what that looks like. I'm not quite sure the answers there, but I think there are different approaches that are needed.
And if I could build upon that as well, Rob, I completely agree with you. And also, I think it is, as Richard was talking about, role modelling, but it's not just about role modelling in terms of well-being. It's role modelling in terms of all of your behaviours as senior leaders. It's around having those coaching conversations with people. So rather than kind of leadership by instruction, it's leadership by inclusion, and that includes saying, like, we don't have all the answers. We're doing something new, and creating that kind of space of psychological safety where it's okay to try stuff and be a bit innovative and maybe not get it right, but learn something from it. So you fail forward is a bit of a phrase that people like to band about, but it's about taking that vulnerability space forward and really sharing that with your people and inviting them in, and having conversations. So there's genuine conversations about explaining, this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it. We'll invite your opinion and we'll have a conversation. Ultimately, we're the senior leaders and we will set the direction, but include people in those conversations and bring that forward.
Thank you. Okay, so at that point, thank you so much for all of your input with those questions. I'd really like to hear from anybody else that's on the call that would like to ask a question. Feel free to unmute yourself. Feel free to or type into the chat box so that we can put some more questions to the panel in our last sort of 20 minutes.
I've got a question actually, Lucy. I'd be really intrigued. At the moment, we're used to every single person in a meeting being on Zoom or Teams or equivalent. 2 years ago, I'd have every single person in a room with me. Is it possible to mix the two, or should we go for one or the other?
I can take that one. Yep.
Yeah.
So I think the ideal scenario is you would either have everybody in a room together, or you would have everybody on a call, because everybody then is starting from the same place and everyone's getting the same experience. That's not always going to be possible. So I think the key here is, if that is a way of working that you're going to want to take forward, it's as a team making sure that you establish the shared ways of working, so collective agreements as your team as to how are we going to handle these scenarios. So almost like shared norms, so to speak, for your team. So it's okay if we've got some people in the room and some people are dialing in and we take a break. If you end up advancing that conversation during the break with people who maybe have gone off because they're on a Zoom to go to the loo and get a coffee, pressing pause and saying, hang on a minute, we're moving this conversation and we're making decisions, that they're then going to come back and feel like they've missed something or they've been excluded. It's about having that kind of conscious approach. It's probably going to feel a bit clunky and a bit weird the first time you start doing it. But if, as a collective team, you've decided these are the ways that we're going to take it forward, it's about saying that and saying, okay, no, this is what we've decided, this is what we're going to do, so that when the group come back, you can kind of open with, we started having this conversation, we paused it because you weren't here, now we're back together, this is how we're going to take it forward. It's probably going to be one of those things that you're going to have to figure it out a bit as it goes. So you can start off with a broad approach of, this is what we think is going to work. Then you're going to start trying it, and there's going to be some stuff that's going to go a bit sideways, and you're going to have to go, okay, right, what are we going to change? How are we going to learn from that? What will we do differently? But it really is going to be about establishing boundaries and norms for your team and how it's going to work for you, and just putting it into practice and having a go.
Thanks, Katie. I mean, almost into Barnaby's world at COEL, I wonder whether, you know, in an office, we're going to need some little audio booths, so 3 people squirrel off into audio booths because 3 other people are at home dialing in, and we'll all be on Zoom together, just so we're on a level playing field.
I think that might be the case. I mean, we as a company struggle with this a bit. So we have, for some certain reasons, a couple of people who don't come in as much as others. And we find that they tend to end up being slightly more of an observer in a meeting than an actual participant. And it is an issue. I think it'll level out, but I think where you can put everyone in the same position, I think, is definitely the way to go.
You're on mute, Gareth.
Some of the people on the call might know our colleague Crystal, who kind of leads on a lot of our sort of AAT and apprenticeships, but she actually lives in Southampton, a long way from anyone else in the team. So she's always had a habit of dialing in. And she says the pandemic's been a game changer for her. It's literally brought her onto a level playing field with everybody else, whereas she always felt like she was a bit excluded and a bit sort of second class in meetings.
Gareth, I think I'd add, it probably depends on the meeting. I mean, Katie sort of set out some sort of protocols, I guess, but there are some meetings that are very factual, that you don't need everyone to be collaborating together. That's fine on that environment. I think if it's about the team and more team working, then I think that you can't do a hybrid approach. But if it's a very factual, sometimes I just give information to my teams and get questions. Well, that's fine if they're there or on the screen, because they're not having necessarily to collaborate and exchange ideas and bounce off each other. But if I wanted them to solve a problem and I wanted us to all work through it together, I'd want everyone physically present to be able to, I guess, harness all of that brain power in the same way. So I think we're probably going to have to think quite carefully about what meetings work in what format. And, you know, Barnaby mentioned about, you know, we're going to have pods, we're going to have booths, we're going to have meeting rooms with screens. So we're going to look at all of those and I guess work out what does work and what doesn't work. So it's a learning curve for us, but I think it's going to be the type of meeting, what we want to get out of the meeting is going to dictate how best to hold that meeting. It's not just going to be do what you please. Some meetings will be you have to physically come in because it's a team meeting and the output is such that we need you to physically all be present, and others we might have more flexibility.
Lara, I think that's true with engaging with clients as well. You know, an event like this, you know, actually I think works extremely well virtually. We would not have got 70 or 80 people in a physical room together, all traveling across different parts of the country or county. Whereas, you know, more intimate, small scale relationship building, you know, networking and lunches and things, I hope will come back to the physical world in a big way.
Just to add to that as well, sometimes it doesn't even need to be a meeting, right? So always think about what is it that you're trying to put across, because I think we've gotten so into the habit of, oh, let's put a Zoom in, let's put a call in. Maybe it doesn't need to be. If you're just conveying information, stick it in an email. You know, if it's going to be a quick exchange, there's a Teams channel or a Slack channel. There are so many other mediums that can be used rather than kind of giving everybody that technology fatigue. So I think now is definitely the time to get really creative and think, what are we trying to achieve and what are the other ways that we can get that output?
Yeah, thank you. Are there any other questions? Or Richard, did you have a comment? Sorry.
No, I was just gonna agree with Katie. And you know, I've had, you know, this thing has rung more times recently, and it's lovely to have a normal voice, you know, phone call with somebody, because actually I don't have to be tied to my computer. I can get up, I can walk around, I can do something. So I think just being, understanding, well, what am I trying to convey? What's the message? What type of meeting is it? Will dictate what we need. And I just think being aware of that, being aware that I don't know how to chair a meeting really effectively. That's, you know, a mix of people online, a mix of people in the office. To Gareth's point, it didn't work before. We know that now. And it's important that we don't end up leveling down going forward.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, any further comments or questions from anybody in the audience or on the panel? It's all gone very quiet. I've certainly, from my perspective, found it extremely useful and interesting to hear everybody's opinions and the considerations as we start to sort of move towards that hybrid working. And so we're looking at properties in Sheffield at the moment, and you know, have to think about how we're going to design that space. So lots of things to think about. Just extend my thanks to everybody on the panel. Thank you so much for giving it your time. Really appreciate that. Do look out, everybody, for our next Leadership Lunch and Learn that will be coming along in the next month or so. We will send you details when we've finalised that. But you know, thank you everybody for sharing your lunch with us today. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have, and I hope to see you all again soon. Thank you very much.